The year before, we're playing the Cleveland Browns, and Mike was a tight end. He was split out. He ran a quick down and pass. I threw a ball to him, and this defensive back kind of gave him a dirty shot, hit him, and knocked him over. And
in the quiet of a Texas evening, the shadows of the past seemed to stretch longer than the yardage on a game-winning drive. For Roger Staubach, the man they called Captain America, those shadows aren't filled with ghosts, but with the echoes of collisions that defined an era. At 83 years old, Staubach doesn't need to look at a trophy case to remember who he is. He feels it in his gait, a physical map of a decade spent in the crosshairs of the most violent defenses the NFL has ever known. To the fans who packed the Cotton Bowl and later Texas Stadium in the 1970s, Roger was the golden boy, the Navy lieutenant who returned from Vietnam to lead the Dallas Cowboys to the pinnacle of sport. But beneath the clean-cut image and the precision passing lived a competitor who thrived on the friction of rivalry. Football in the 70s wasn't the choreographed, protected game we see today. It was a tactical war of attrition played on frozen turf and muddy grass, where every yard was bought with a bruise. For Roger, the game was a test of will, a 60-minute chess match played at the speed of a car crash. Now, as he reflects on a life lived with Captain Comeback intensity, Roger looks back not just at his teammates, but at the men who made his life miserable on Sunday afternoons. These weren't just opponents. They were the roadblocks to his greatness, the men he truly, in the heat of battle, hated to see across the line of scrimmage. If you grew up watching the silver helmets clash with the black and gold, or if you remember the tension of a playoff Sunday in the 1970s, then you know this isn't just about stats. It's about the brotherhood of those who survived the trenches. If you value the history of the game, join our community of veteran fans by subscribing, so we can continue to tell these stories that the modern media often forgets. Today, we dive into the story of a legend. At 83, Roger Staubach names the 6 players he hated the most. Not out of malice, but out of a profound, bone-deep respect for the way they tried to break him. Roger's journey began far from the bright lights of Monday Night Football. Born in Cincinnati in 1942, he was a Navy man first. Winning the Heisman Trophy at the Naval Academy in 1963 was a prelude to a 5-year commitment to his country, including a tour in Vietnam. By the time he joined the Cowboys as a 27-year-old rookie in 1969, he was already a man formed by discipline. Under the stoic guidance of Tom Landry, Roger became the heartbeat of America's team. He led them to victories in Super Bowl VI in 1972 and Super Bowl XII in 1978. But it was the narrow losses and the fierce hits that stayed with him. He was a scrambler when scrambling was considered dangerous, a leader who believed that as long as there was time on the clock, a miracle was possible. But to perform those miracles, he had to overcome 6 men who stood like giants in his path. Number 6. Deacon Jones. When Roger Staubach entered the league, the head slap was still legal, and nobody utilized it with more terrifying efficiency than David Deacon Jones. Roger remembers the first time he faced the Los Angeles Rams and saw the man who practically invented the word sack. Deacon didn't just want to tackle the quarterback, he wanted to dismantle the very idea of a passing game. To Roger, Deacon Jones was a force of nature that forced a quarterback to develop eyes in the back of his head. In the early 70s, the Rams' fearsome foursome was the gold standard for defensive dominance. Deacon was the lightning bolt of that group. Roger recalls the sheer noise of Deacon coming off the edge, the trash talk, the intensity, and that devastating hand to the helmet that would leave a quarterback's ears ringing for 3 series. Roger hated Deacon because he was the first player who made him realize that his scrambling ability, honed on the fields of Annapolis, could be a liability against a man with that kind of closing speed. In the 1970 and 1971 seasons, every time the Cowboys played the Rams, Staubach knew he was in for a physical ordeal. Deacon represented the old guard of the NFL, mean, relentless, and utterly unapologetic. For a young Staubach, Deacon Jones was the ultimate welcome to the league moment, a player who demanded you grow up fast or get carried off the field. Number 5. Fran Tarkenton. This rivalry was different. It wasn't about a defensive end trying to take Roger's head off. It was about the mirror image across the field. Fran the Mad Scrambler Tarkenton of the Minnesota Vikings was the only other quarterback in the 70s who could match Roger's ability to create something out of nothing. To Roger, hating Tarkenton was about the frustration of watching another master do exactly what you were trying to do, often just as well. Throughout the 1970s, the NFC was essentially a two-team race between the Cowboys and the Vikings. They met in the playoffs repeatedly, most notably in the 1975 NFC Divisional Round, the game that birthed the Hail Mary. Roger remembers the tension of that day in Bloomington, Minnesota. He spent the entire game looking at the sidelines, seeing Tarkenton orchestrating the Vikings' offense with that uncanny vision. Roger hated playing against Fran because he knew no lead was safe. If Roger led a comeback, Tarkenton was capable of answering right back. It was a rivalry of prestige. Who was the better scrambler? Who was the better leader? When they faced off in the 1977 NFC Championship game, which the Cowboys won 23-6 to head to Super Bowl XII, Roger felt a sense of relief more than anything. To beat Tarkenton was to prove you were the king of the mountain, but doing it required a level of mental exhaustion that Roger never forgot. Fran was the rival who kept Roger awake at night, studying film, trying to find one more inch of advantage. Number 4. Jack Youngblood. If Deacon Jones was the terror of Roger's early years, Jack Youngblood was the persistent nightmare of the mid to late 70s. The Rams and Cowboys had a playoff rivalry that defined the decade, meeting 8 times in the postseason. And at the center of the Rams' defense was number 85, Jack Youngblood. Roger describes Youngblood as a human buzzsaw. There was an honesty to Jack's violence that Roger respected, but deeply loathed facing. Youngblood was famously tough. This is the man who played the entire 1979 playoffs and Super Bowl XIV with a broken leg. That was the kind of individual Roger had to outwit. In the 1975 NFC Championship, the Cowboys destroyed the Rams 37-7, but Roger remembers Youngblood never stopped coming. He was a relentless pursuer who didn't care about the score. He only cared about the next collision. Roger hated Youngblood because he was impossible to discourage. You could block him perfectly on one play, and he'd be back, twice as hard on the next. In their 1978 NFC Championship meeting, where Dallas shut out the Rams 28-0, Roger spent much of the game dodging Youngblood's grasp. To Roger, Jack was the personification of the Rams' grit, a man who made every completion feel like a victory over a physical obstacle. Number 3. Jack Tatum. As the 70s progressed, the NFL became a game of intimidation, and no one represented that better than the Oakland Raiders' free safety, Jack the Assassin Tatum. While the Cowboys and Raiders didn't play every year, the cross-conference rivalry was intense, and the Super Bowl aspirations of both teams often put them on a collision course in the preseason and the headlines. Roger recalls the scouting reports on Tatum. In an era where the middle of the field was a no-fly zone, Tatum was the primary reason. Roger hated Tatum because he changed the way Roger had to coach his receivers. Passing to Drew Pearson or Golden Richards meant potentially sending them into a hospital ward if Tatum was lurking. Roger felt a protective instinct for his teammates, and Tatum was the man who threatened their safety with every hit. He wasn't looking for the interception, he was looking for the knockout. For a quarterback like Roger, who valued precision and timing, Tatum was the chaos factor. He was the player who could turn a perfect spiral into a disaster. Facing the Raiders meant Roger had to be more than a quarterback. He had to be a strategist, carefully picking his spots to avoid the devastating collisions Tatum was known for. It was a psychological battle as much as a physical one, and Roger hated the way Tatum could shrink the field just by standing in the secondary. Number 2. Mean Joe Green. You cannot tell the story of Roger Staubach without the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you cannot tell the story of the Steelers without Mean Joe Green. He was the cornerstone, the foundation of the steel curtain defense that stood between Roger and at least 2 more Super Bowl rings. Roger's hate for Joe Green was born out of the frustration of greatness meeting greatness. In Super Bowl X in January 1976, Roger felt the full weight of Joe Green's presence. Joe wasn't just a defensive tackle, he was a disruptor who collapsed the pocket from the inside out, making it impossible for Roger to step up and throw. Roger remembers the 1975 season ending in that 21-17 loss to Pittsburgh, a game where Joe Green seemed to be everywhere. Then came the rematch in Super Bowl XIII in January 1979, often called the greatest Super Bowl ever played. Again, Joe Green was the mountain Roger couldn't climb. Even when the Cowboys moved the ball, Joe was there in the red zone, a terrifying figure in black and gold. Roger hated Joe because he was the one player who could nullify the Cowboys' sophisticated flex defense and offensive schemes by sheer physical will. Joe Green represented the bully that Roger, the Navy officer, was determined to outmaneuver. But more often than not, Joe's sheer power won the day. Number 1. Jack Lambert. If Joe Green was the foundation of the Steelers, Jack Lambert was the snarling, toothless soul of the team that Roger Staubach found most difficult to overcome. To Roger, Lambert wasn't just a linebacker. He was a psychological operative. The rivalry reached its boiling point during Super Bowl X. After a missed field goal, Cowboys safety Cliff Harris patted Steelers kicker Roy Gerela on the helmet in a bit of taunting. Lambert, seeing this, grabbed Harris and threw him to the ground in a display of protective fury. Roger saw that and knew the game had changed. Lambert played with a level of intensity that felt personal. Roger hated Lambert because he was the smartest mean player in the league. He could drop into coverage as well as he could plug a hole. In the 1978 season's Super Bowl XIII, it was Lambert who seemed to read Roger's mind, patrolling the middle of the field and punishing anyone who dared to cross it. Roger recalls the way Lambert would look at him across the line. No face mask could hide the intensity in those eyes. He was the one player who truly got under the skin of the Cowboys. While Tom Landry preached class and composure, Lambert was the antithesis of that. He was raw, unfiltered football violence. Roger hated the way Lambert could galvanize the entire Pittsburgh sideline with a single hit. He was the ultimate nemesis, the man who stood between Roger and the dynasty the Cowboys felt they deserved. To beat the Steelers, you had to survive Jack Lambert, and at 83, Roger still carries the mental scars of those encounters. As Roger Staubach looks back from the vantage point of his 9th decade, the hate has long since distilled into a golden form of appreciation. He realizes now that without the steel curtain, without the fearsome foursome, and without the brilliance of Tarkenton, his own story wouldn't be nearly as compelling. Those 6 men were the sharpening stones for his own blade. He remembers the 1971 season, where he finally took the starting job from Craig Morton and led the Cowboys to their first title in Super Bowl VI against the Dolphins. He remembers the 1977 season, where the addition of Tony Dorsett finally gave him the weapon he needed to bypass those legendary defenses for a second ring in Super Bowl XII. But mostly, he remembers the brotherhood. After the games, when the mud was washed off and the roar of the crowd had faded into the Texas night, there was an unspoken bond. "We were all just trying to win our piece of the dirt," Roger might say. He respects the game that was, a game of giants, played by men who didn't care about brands or social media, but about the respect of their peers. At 83, Roger Staubach stands as a testament to the resilience of that era. He wasn't just a quarterback. He was a survivor of the NFL's most competitive decade. The men he hated were actually his greatest teachers, showing him that greatness isn't found in the easy wins, but in the moments when you're staring down a middle linebacker who wants to knock you out of the game, and you still find the courage to throw the post route. The 1970s NFL was a unique moment in American history, a time of grit, transition, and legends that seemed larger than life. Roger Staubach, the man who never gave up, remains the ultimate symbol of that time. And as he names these 6 rivals, he isn't just reciting a list of names. He's recounting a history of battles that will never be forgotten, as long as there are fans who remember the sight of a silver helmet glinting under the stadium lights, charging headlong into the fray. Roger's story is a reminder that in football, as in life, our enemies often define us more than our friends. They are the ones who force us to reach deeper, to scramble faster, and to stand taller when the pocket collapses. At 83, Captain America is still standing, a legendary figure who knows that the hate of a rival is often the highest form of flattery a player can ever receive. These 6 men earned his respect because they never gave him an inch, and in the world of Roger Staubach, that is the only way the game should ever be played. Stay tuned and subscribe to get to know more about NFL Insights.